The icy night rain, mingled with dull peals of thunder, pounded again and again against the translucent paper covering the carved canopy bed. I suddenly opened my eyes, my chest heaving violently as I gulped in breath after breath. Deep in my throat, it felt as though the sickly sweetness and searing agony left by the poisoned wine from my previous life still lingered, making every bone and limb feel faintly nauseated. But before me there was no dark, damp prison cell, nor Fu Mingjin's vicious face, twisted by jealousy. What met my eyes was the familiar openwork canopy above the bed. The expensive scent of benzoin mingled beneath my nostrils with a faint milky odor. Only one dim goat horn palace lantern remained lit in the room, casting a weak, yellowish glow. From the small rosewood cradle not far away came, from time to time, the faint smacking sounds of a baby. I raised my trembling hands, only to see a pair of small, soft, fair hands belonging to a 7-year-old child. I had been reborn. Reborn on the night when my biological younger sister, Fu Mingjin, was not yet half a month old. Before I could fully recover from the ecstasy and lingering shock of my rebirth, the lattice door outside suddenly gave a faint creak. The sound was barely audible amid the thunderstorm, yet it instantly tightened every nerve in my body. I instinctively closed my eyes, making my breathing as slow and steady as possible, and watched the movement in the outer room intently through the gaps between my lashes. A hunched, obese shadow slipped in, carrying an enormous coarse cloth-covered bamboo basket. By the faint candlelight, I recognized the face. It was Nanny Lu, my mother's most trusted wet nurse. To make it easier to care for my newborn sister at night, Mother had specifically arranged for Nanny Lu to sleep in the outer room's enclosed bed. And because I was so enamored with my newborn sister, I had clung to Mother and begged her until she allowed a small luohan couch to be set up beside my sister's cradle. At that moment, Mother was sleeping deeply, weakened by the birth and further drowsed by the incense Nanny Lu had deliberately made more potent. The several senior maids assigned to keep watch had also long since dozed off beneath the corridor outside the door. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Nanny Lu. I watched her tiptoe to the cradle and place the battered bamboo basket in her hands on the floor. Nervously, she glanced around, her gaze lingering for a moment on my luohan couch. Only after seeing that I was sleeping soundly and motionless did she finally let out a long sigh of relief. Nanny Lu extended her rough, thick hands and lifted the thin brocade quilt embroidered with the design of 100 sons and 1,000 grandsons from the cradle, then picked up the exquisitely delicate baby sleeping soundly inside. That was my biological younger sister, the Fu family's legitimate second daughter, Fu Mingjin. Next, Nanny Lu crouched down, lifted the tattered cloth covering the bamboo basket on the floor, and took out another baby. In the glow of the palace lantern, I could see clearly. It was a yellow-skinned, tiny and scrawny baby girl, with even her lanugo sparse and patchy. This is the child of Nanny Lu's biological daughter. A few days ago, she used the excuse of returning home to visit her family, but in reality, she went to secretly bring this bastard, who had only just been born, into the Marquis's residence. A vicious scheme to replace the crown prince with a cat was unfolding right before my eyes. In my previous life, it was at this very moment that I was awakened by the sound of thunder and happened to stumble upon the scene. Terrified, I cried out for help, bringing the maid on night duty and Mother running over. Nanny Lu was pinned to the ground on the spot. Once her plot was exposed, Father ordered her to be beaten to death. And my younger sister, Fu Mingjin, who had nearly been switched, was rescued by my own hands. From then on, she became the dearest relative I cherished in this world. I protected her as she grew up, placing before her, without reservation, the finest silks and satins, gold and silver jewelry, and even instruction in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Whatever she wanted, I, as her elder sister, had never once said no. But what did I get in return? What I got in return was her secretly carrying on an affair with my fiancé, to whom I had been betrothed since childhood, after she came of age. What I got in return was her joining forces with outsiders to frame me and ruin my reputation. What I got in return was the venomous cursing on her face as she personally held that cup of poisoned wine, gripped my chin tightly, and forced it down my throat. Fu Mingyan, stop looking at me with that lofty expression. Do you think I'd be grateful to you just because you saved me back then? You only kept me around to make yourself look noble. From childhood to adulthood, I only ever got whatever good things were left over after you picked through them. You've always looked down on me deep down. As long as you're alive, I'll never be able to rise above you. The heart-wrenching betrayal and agony from my previous life coiled around my heart like a venomous snake. In the darkness, I bit down hard on my lower lip until I tasted the thick tang of blood in my mouth, only then managing to suppress the urge to rush down and tear Nanny Lou limb from limb. Save her? Why should I save her? Since in her previous life she thought the rich food and fine clothes I gave her were charity, and believed that being the legitimate daughter of the Marquis Manor had held her back, then in this life, I'll grant her wish and let her live the good life she was meant to live. I watched coldly as Nanny Lou deftly stripped the priceless swaddling clothes from Fu Mingjin and put them on the scrawny, gaunt imposter heiress, then carefully placed the imposter heiress into the red sandalwood cradle. While my noble younger sister was wrapped in a coarse burlap cloth that reeked of mold and sour rancidity. The rough fabric scraped against the baby's delicate skin. Fu Mingjin wriggled uncomfortably, puckering her lips as she was about to cry. Nanny Lou trembled in fright and swiftly clapped a hand over her mouth. Little ancestor, don't blame this old servant for being heartless. Nanny Lou lowered her voice and murmured to the baby in her arms, who was nearly suffocating beneath her hand. Her fleshy face was twisted with extreme greed and ferocity. You can only blame yourself for being born into such a good family, with endless riches and glory awaiting you. But my poor granddaughter was born to suffer alongside a gambling addict father. I raised Madam on my own milk, so trading one of her daughters for a lifetime of wealth for my granddaughter isn't exactly cheating her. Don't worry. Once we reach the Lou residence, I'll make sure you get some sour leftovers to eat. You won't starve to death. Listening to this shameless speech, I sneered inwardly again and again. Starve to death? Granny Lou's son-in-law, the kind of man addicted to gambling, who beat his wife and daughters whenever he got drunk, was no kind soul. In my previous life, it was precisely because Granny Lou was beaten to death that the gambling addict lost the Marquis Manor's financial support. Within a few years, he beat his wife to death. Now that Fu Mingjin had taken the peasant girl's place and been carried into such a living hell, I wondered whether this true heiress, who had complained in her previous life that I had not given her enough, could endure the squalid slums and forge the dignity she wanted. Seeing that Fu Mingjin's cheeks had turned purple from holding her breath and that she was barely moving, Granny Lou finally released her grip. She stuffed her haphazardly into a coarse cloth bamboo basket, then covered it with a thick layer of tattered straw matting. After finishing all this, Granny Lou was drenched in cold sweat. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and, feeling guilty as a thief, once again glanced around. Only after confirming that no one had been awakened did she pick up the heavy bamboo basket and tiptoe out of the room, just as stealthily as she had entered. The door closed again, and the room fell silent once more, with only the rumbling thunderstorm outside continuing unabated. I slowly opened my eyes and sat up from the Luohan couch. In the darkness, I lightly stepped barefoot onto the thick Persian carpet and made my way toward the rosewood cradle. The fake heiress in the cradle seemed unaccustomed to the soft cloud brocade and whimpered restlessly twice. I extended a finger and, by the faint light of the palace lantern, coldly examined this unfamiliar face. This was Chuanxing, the poor wretch who, in her previous life, had died young in the slums after being harmed by her own maternal grandmother, without ever showing her face even once. In this life, she had taken Fu Mingjin's place and become the cherished daughter of this Marquis' residence. From now on, you are the second young lady of the Fu family. My fingertips lightly brushed over her slightly rough cheek, and the corners of my lips curled into a bone-chilling smile. My voice was soft, yet carried a murderous aura as though I had returned from hell. As long as you obediently play the part of a foolish girl, sister promises that you'll enjoy all the wealth and splendor this Marquis' residence has to offer. As for that ungrateful younger sister who had been taken away. Thunder suddenly crashed outside, and lightning tore across the night sky. I turned to look out at the endless darkness and torrential rain beyond the window. This downpour would surely wash away Madame Lou's footprints completely. Meanwhile, my dear younger sister, Fu Mingjin, was lying in that foul-smelling bamboo basket, being carried step by step toward the quagmire that awaited her. This time, there would be no foolish older sister to stand in front of her out of sympathy. Mingjin, enjoy your muddy life in this lifetime. This is the fate you were destined for deep down. Since the night of the torrential rain, life in the Marquis' residence seemed to have returned to an undisturbed calm. Because Mother had caught a chill during her confinement and had yet to recover, she entrusted the entire responsibility of caring for the second miss to Nanny Lu. Whenever she encountered anyone, Nanny Lu would redden her eyes, looking every bit like a loyal servant overcome with gratitude, and swear that she would cherish the second miss as if she were her own granddaughter. Only I knew that this performance of hers was merely meant to keep a firm hold over the fake heiress she had personally sent soaring to the heights, namely, Fu Mingjin as she was now known. Because the real Fu Mingjin had long since become, by this point, an unwanted burden and money-losing daughter in her son-in-law's household, in the dirtiest, most dilapidated slum in the western part of the city. I once secretly sent my most trusted maid to the western part of the city to make inquiries. When the maid returned that day, her eyes were red. Lowering her voice, she reported to me, "Miss, the Lu family truly isn't fit for human habitation. Granny Lu's son-in-law is named Lu Dazhuang, and he's a good-for-nothing who's addicted to gambling." He had originally expected Granny Lu to bring home a grandson, but when he saw it was a girl, he flew into a rage on the spot. That baby girl. Oh no, the Lu family named her Zhaodi. She was so thin that she was little more than skin and bones, without even the strength to cry. The Lu daughter-in-law had no milk to begin with, and Lu Dazhuang was unwilling to feed her even half a bowl of rice gruel. He merely had his wife dip a scrap of cloth in some sour water and drip it into the baby's mouth. This servant hid outside the window and took a glance. The poor little thing was wrapped in a scrap of burlap and left in a drafty corner, with even the skin on her face bitten open by rats. It was truly a sin to see. I sat upright in a rosewood chair, listening to the maid's report while leisurely peeling a fresh lychee that had just been hurriedly sent from Lingnan. The lychee flesh was crystal clear, and its sweet juice trickled down my fingertips. Sin? I placed the peeled lychee in my mouth and chewed slowly, my eyes filled with icy mockery. That is the blessing she brought upon herself. Without the Marquis' household spoiling her, perhaps this Zhaodi might even have grown a sound set of bones. In my previous life, I had nourished her with gold, silver, and jade, yet she complained that I was too aloof. Now, she could finally experience what it truly meant to be brought down into the dust. I wanted to see whether the Zhaodi who grew up in an environment in the Lu household that was worse than one fit for pigs or dogs would still have the nerve to accuse me, her legitimate elder sister, of looking down on her. The days passed one after another, and before I knew it, 5 years had gone by. At 13, I was no longer the little girl who only knew how to act spoiled in her mother's arms. With a composure and precociousness far beyond my years, I gradually earned my father's praise and my mother's reliance. My mother also began, intentionally or otherwise, to have me sit in and learn about the many affairs of the Marquis' household. And my fake younger sister, Fu Mingjin, also grew into a chubby 5-year-old girl under Nanny Lu's meticulous care. One morning, just after I had paid my respects to Mother at Rueha Hall, I saw Nanny Lu leading Fu Mingjin inside. Oh my, this old servant pays her respects to Madam. Please take a look, Madam, does second Mrs. Pink Cloud brocade dress fit her well today? This old servant specially went to the storeroom to select the fabric. It makes second Miss look positively adorable, like a little fairy attendant of Guanyin Bodhisattva. Nanny Lu said obsequiously, nudging the chubby little girl forward. I looked coldly at my fake younger sister before me, wrapped up like a pink meat dumpling. She was not actually unattractive. It was just that Nanny Lu had fed her far too well, making her face so plump that her features were nearly squeezed together. Worse still, her eyes darted about constantly, revealing an innate vulgarity and greed, without the slightest trace of the poise expected of a young lady from an eminent family. She yanked her hand away from Nanny Lu and scampered over to her mother, stretching out her chubby little hand to tug at the jade garment clasped pinned to her mother's sleeve. She shouted loudly, "Mother! I want this!" Nanny said I'm the legitimate daughter of the Marquis' household, so all the good things in this residence should belong to me. As soon as she said this, the room fell instantly silent. The smile on Mother's face stiffened slightly, and her brows drew together almost imperceptibly. That jade garment clasp was a cherished possession passed down from her maternal grandmother, and she had never bestowed it on anyone lightly. Seeing this, Nanny Lu's expression changed slightly. She hurried forward and covered Fu Mingjin's mouth, pretending to scold her. "Second miss, don't make a fuss. That is Madam's cherished possession." Then she turned to Mother with an ingratiating smile. "Please don't take offense, Madam. Second miss is still young." She merely saw how fine the jade was and spoke without thinking, as children do. This old servant usually teaches second miss to respect her parents and love her elder sister. Kind elder sister? I slowly set down the teacup in my hand. The porcelain clinked with a crisp sound. Nanny Lu certainly taught her manners well. I just wonder, when my younger sister said moments ago, all the good things in this household should belong to her, was that something Nanny Lu taught her, or did my sister figure it out herself? My gaze, sharp as lightning, shot straight at Nanny Lu. Nanny Lu's heart trembled beneath my stare. Over the past few years, she had come to feel that I, the eldest young lady, was unfathomable. My eyes seemed capable of seeing straight through people's hearts, making her feel every time she faced me as though she were standing naked in the freezing snow. "Why, young miss, you jest." Sweat broke out on Nanny Lu's forehead. Forcing herself to remain calm, she let out a dry laugh. "The second young miss is still young. How could she understand such things?" "If you don't understand, then I'll teach you." I rose and walked over to Fu Mingjin. The chubby little girl had clearly been spoiled by Nanny Lu. When I approached, she was not afraid in the slightest. Instead, she raised her chin and glared at me arrogantly. "Nanny said I'm Mother's biological daughter. You were only born a few years before me, so why do you always get first pick of the good things in this household? I want that jadeite." Smack! A crisp slap suddenly rang out in the room. Fu Mingjin was struck off balance and fell to the floor. Clutching her swollen left cheek, she stared at me in disbelief before bursting into loud sobs. Mother cried out in shock, clearly not expecting me to strike her in public. I paid no heed to Mother's exclamation. Instead, I drew a silk handkerchief from my sleeve and leisurely wiped my hand, as though I had touched something filthy. "Mother, uncut jade cannot be made into a useful vessel." I turned around and curtsied to Mother, my tone so calm it was infuriating. Since younger sister bears the title of the Marquis estate's legitimate daughter, she ought to know the difference between high and low, elder and younger, as well as the rules of an eminent family. If we let her continue making a spectacle of herself with such shallow judgment and utter lack of upbringing, then when she steps beyond the gates of the Marquis estate one day, it will be father and mother's reputation that suffers. The slap I gave her today was to teach her that she does not know the limits of heaven and earth, and to help Mother purge the family of its disgrace. The speech was lofty and impeccable, leaving no room for fault. Although Mother felt sorry for her younger daughter, she valued the Marquis estate's reputation even more deep down. After hearing me put it that way, she swallowed the reprimand she had been about to deliver and merely let out a sigh. Seeing this, Nanny Lu trembled with heartache. She rushed forward and pulled Fu Mingjin into her arms, a flash of extreme hatred gleaming in her eyes. She had originally thought that as long as she smuggled her own granddaughter into the Marquis's residence, she could use this connection to wield power throughout the inner household. Over the years, she had openly and covertly shortchanged the second Mrs. monthly allowance, and had even secretly stolen valuable furnishings from the rooms to support her gambling-addicted son-in-law. She had raised the fake heiress into such a stupid and overbearing girl precisely so she would be easier to control. But she had never imagined that I, the eldest miss, would not only be harder to deceive than an ordinary child, but would instead become the greatest obstacle to her control over the Marquis's inner household. The eldest miss is right. Nanny Lu ground her teeth and lowered her head, concealing the resentment in her eyes. This old servant failed in her instruction. From now on, I will certainly discipline her more strictly. See that you do. I looked down condescendingly at the grandmother and granddaughter putting on this act. Nanny Lou, the rules of this marquise residence are greater than heaven itself. If I hear my younger sister say anything she shouldn't again. I paused, the corners of my lips curling into a bloodthirsty smile. The family rules of this marquise residence are not to be trifled with. Nanny Lou shuddered all over, as though she had been targeted by a venomous snake, and hurriedly agreed. Watching this absurdly foolish grandmother and granddaughter retreat in utter despair, I felt not the slightest ripple of emotion. The false heiress is throwing her weight around in the marquise manor, while the true legitimate daughter of the marquise household in the western part of the city is probably fighting stray dogs for half a stale steamed bun. Nanny Lou, do you really think you can control the marquise manor with a fool? The real show is only just beginning. Time flies, and another 3 years have passed. Under Nanny Lou's deliberate indulgence and spoiling, 8-year-old Fu Mingjin had successfully grown into a fat, foolish, arrogant little bully. In the residence, she would often beat and berate the maids, and even dared to point at the accountant's nose and scold him, simply because he had refused to violate the rules and withdraw money at her request to buy those tacky little trinkets from the marketplace. Although Mother had tried to discipline her, whenever she saw her youngest daughter crying and rolling on the floor, with Nanny Lou beside her adding fuel to the fire and wiping away tears as she said, "The second miss is frail by nature and cannot bear the slightest grievance," Mother could only sigh and give up. As for me, I had always maintained a chilling indulgence toward everything this false younger sister did. Not only did I refrain from slapping her in public as I had when I was 5, but whenever she made a mistake, I would rush to cover for her before Mother could find out. Whenever she wanted some expensive jewelry or rare fabrics, I would even take the initiative to allocate some of my own allowance to her. Mother often praised me for being sensible and for carrying myself like an eldest sister. Nanny Lou was even secretly pleased, believing that I was afraid of her, the favorite at Mother's side, and was trying to curry favor with her granddaughter through small favors. Only Xia Chan, my personal maid, knew just how cold the smile in my eyes was whenever I looked at that younger sister who was becoming increasingly like a spoiled, vulgar shrew. To bring about a person's destruction, you must first drive them mad. The days of Granny Lou throwing her weight around in the marquise residence should also be coming to an end. That evening, I was sitting in the waterside pavilion feeding the koi when Xia Chan came hurrying over. Lowering her voice, she reported, "Eldest young lady, that Granny Lou has made another move." I saw her with my own eyes secretly take the set of ruby jewelry Madame had bestowed on second young miss and pass it through the side gate to a furtive-looking man. That man was none other than her gambling-addicted son-in-law, Liu Dazhuang. I scattered a handful of fish food and watched the koi in the pond tear into one another as they fought over it. A cold smile tugged at the corners of my lips. Looks like Liu Dazhuang has suffered another crushing loss at the gambling den. You can say that again. Xia Chan's tone held a hint of disdain. I heard he lost a full 300 taels of silver at Changle Ward last night, and the gambling house's men chopped off one of his fingers. To protect him, Nanny Lou has secretly replaced everything in second Miss's room that could be sold with fakes over the past few years. Now that there's truly nothing left to steal, she's even dared to lay hands on the imperial gift. If she hadn't touched an imperial gift, how could I have torn out this poisonous weed by the roots? I dusted the crumbs from my hands, a sharp murderous intent flashing in my eyes. That ruby jewelry set had been bestowed a few days ago by the noble consort in the palace upon the women of the marquise household. Though its style was somewhat outdated, every gemstone on it was recorded in the Imperial Household Department's registers. If Nanny Lou had stolen something else, she would at most be considered a thief within the household, beaten and sold off. But if she had stolen an imperial gift and pawned it to raise gambling money, that was a capital offense. I rose to my feet and straightened my dress. Go and redeem that ruby jewelry set from the pawnshop for me, exactly as it is. Remember, don't alert anyone. The following morning, in Rueha Hall. Mother was seated upright in the principal seat, checking the accounts with several senior stewardesses. I sat to one side, calmly perusing the recent account books. "Madam, word has come from the palace that Her Highness the Noble Consort's birthday is approaching, and a flower viewing banquet will be held in the palace. They specifically instructed that the female family members of all officials of fourth rank or higher in the capital should attend and join in the festivities, one of the senior stewardesses reported respectfully. Upon hearing this, Mother's face lit up with joy. This is a tremendous honor. Mingyan, Mingjin, you sisters go and bring out the jewelry set Her Highness bestowed upon us a few days ago. Wear it to the palace that day to give thanks. I put down the account book and answered obediently, yes, Mother. But Fu Mingjin, who had been standing to the side eating pastries, suddenly froze. She turned to look at Nanny Lu, a flash of panic in her eyes. Nanny Lu's face instantly turned deathly pale. She had never imagined that Mother would suddenly ask for the imperial ruby jewelry set. Last night, she had secretly given the set to Lu Dazhuang to exchange for money to pay off her gambling debts. Madam. Nanny Lu forced herself to remain calm and dropped to her knees with a thud, cold sweat pouring down her forehead. Yesterday, while the second miss was playing, she accidentally knocked the head ornaments against something. This old servant was afraid they would upset Madam, so I took it upon myself to send them to the jewel pavilion outside for repairs. How about the second miss wear a different set of jadeite ornaments that day? Repairs? Mother frowned slightly. They were bestowed by the Emperor. How could you casually send them to an outside shop for repairs? You old servant, you're becoming more and more undisciplined. Yes, this old servant knows she was wrong. I'll go get them back right away. Nanny Lu repeatedly knocked her head against the floor, attempting to muddle through, while frantically calculating how she could scrape together the 300 taels of silver needed to redeem the ornaments. Just then, I let out a soft laugh. Its crisp sound seemed especially abrupt in the quiet room. Granny Lu, for repairing this headdress, do we really need to replace the entire set of rubies with the lowest quality red glass? As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the room was startled. Granny Lu abruptly raised her head and stared at me in disbelief, as though she had seen a ghost. Miss, what are you saying? This old servant doesn't understand. I ignored her and simply called toward the door, Xia Chan, bring it in. Xia Chan entered at once, carrying an exquisite rosewood brocade box in her hands. She walked up to her mother and opened the box. Inside lay 2 identical ruby jewelry sets. However, one set was dazzling, its gemstones sparkling brilliantly. The other, though finely carved, had red beads that gave off a cheap, glassy sheen in the sunlight. Her mother recognized at a glance that they were modeled after the set bestowed by the noble consort. She sprang to her feet, seized the fake set, and demanded in a trembling voice, What? What is going on? Where did this counterfeit come from? I slowly walked up to Nanny Lu and looked down at her paper-pale face. Word by word, I said, Mother, this set of genuine pieces was redeemed by Xia Chan this morning from the dead pawn shop in the western part of the city for 500 taels of silver. And this set of fakes was found in the hidden compartment at the very bottom of my younger sister's dressing table. Nanny Lu, you stole an imperial gift and pawned it at a black market dead pawn shop. Not only have you committed a capital crime, but you also tried to deceive Mother with these cheap glass imitations. If I hadn't happened to notice Xia Chan recognizing an item at the pawn shop that day and followed the clues to investigate, and if these fakes had been worn into the palace today, would the heads of the dozens of people in our Marquis' household still be on our shoulders? My voice was not loud, but every word struck straight at her heart. Nanny Lu collapsed completely onto the floor. She knew it was over. It was all over. You wretched dog servant. Mother trembled with rage, pointing at Nanny Lu as she cursed her furiously. The Fu family has treated you well, yet you dared to commit such a treasonous act. Guards! Drag this old scoundrel out, give her 50 heavy lashes, and send her to the authorities for prosecution. Spare me, madam. Madam! This old servant was confused for a moment. Nanny Lu wailed as she lunged for the hem of Mother's skirt, only to be pinned firmly to the ground by several burly women. Seeing that the situation was turning against her, Fu Mingjin not only made no attempt to plead for mercy but hid behind a chair in fright, repeatedly distancing herself from the matter. "Mother. She was the one who stole it. I don't know anything. That old woman took it herself." Nanny Lu looked at the biological granddaughter for whom she had devoted all her efforts, and for whom she had even gone so far as to switch the Marquis' household's true daughter so she could rise to prominence. Yet now, the girl was so heartless that she pushed Nanny Lu forward to take the blame. The despair and venom in her eyes nearly spilled over. You ungrateful wretch." Granny Lu cursed viciously. I watched the farce coldly, without the slightest trace of pity in my heart. As Granny Lu was dragged away, her anguished cries resounded throughout the entire Marquis' residence. After those 50 strokes, even if she didn't die, she would be left skin and bones. And Lu Dazhuang, who was addicted to gambling, would soon be beaten to death by the gambling den's men once he lost the support of Granny Lu, his golden goose. As for my real younger sister, Fu Mingjin, who had suffered in place of the Marquis' legitimate daughter in the slums west of the city, her only refuge would soon come crashing down completely. In our previous life, you thought the favor I bestowed upon you was too heavy a burden. In this life, I have cut off every escape route you have, so that you, this true phoenix who prides herself on her nobility, will remain mired in the mud, never to rise again. After Nanny Lu was driven out of the Marquis' manor, the good days of the fake heiress, Fu Mingjin, came to an end as well. Although Mother did not investigate whether she had been involved in the theft, out of consideration for their many years as mother and daughter, she had ultimately lost patience with her and placed her under the supervision of the strictest instructing nanny. The servants who had once fawned over her changed sides with the wind. They not only skimped on the charcoal and ice allocated to her courtyard, but often served her nothing but leftovers and cold scraps. Apart from throwing tantrums and rolling around in the courtyard, that fool did not have the slightest ability to fight back. I couldn't be bothered to pay attention to that fool who knows nothing but how to make dogs fight dogs. Because I was waiting for a far more interesting reunion. Less than a month after Madame Lu was imprisoned, Lu Dazhuang, that degenerate gambler, had both legs broken by people from Changelfong because of the enormous gambling debt he owed. To repay it, he sold everything in the house that could be sold. In the end, he set his sights on his scrawny daughter, Zhaodi. He sold her to a trafficker for a mere 3 taels of silver. And I, long before that trafficker had taken even his first step out of the slums west of the city, had Xiachan pay double the price to buy the girl into the Marquis' residence. When Xiachan led the girl named Zhaodi before me, I was sitting upright in the warm chamber, holding a delicate bowl of bird's nest soup. The 8-year-old girl was so short that she was not even as tall as a 5- or 6-year-old child. She wore a coarse cloth tunic so tattered that its original color could no longer be discerned. Barefoot, she reeked from head to toe of a nauseating sour stench. Her face was covered in overlapping purple and blue bruises, while her frostbite sores had festered and oozed pus, making her original features nearly impossible to recognize. The only thing one could remember was her pair of wild eyes, guarded and venomous like those of a starving wolf. In my previous life, she had looked at me with those same eyes as she poured poison down my throat. "Raise your head." I set down the bird's nest soup, my voice cold and utterly devoid of emotion. The girl shuddered all over, staring fixedly at me like a frightened stray dog, yet stubbornly biting her lower lip and refusing to bow her head. "How dare you? The young mistress is talking to you. Get on your knees." Xiachan kicked her in the back of the knee. The girl let out a muffled groan and fell heavily to her knees on the blue brick floor, scraping them until they bled. Yet she forcibly held back her tears, and the venom in her eyes only deepened. What admirable backbone! I rose and walked over to her, looking down condescendingly at the younger sister I had protected with all my heart in my previous life. "What's your name?" I dabbed at my nose and mouth with a handkerchief, concealing the disgust in my eyes. "Zhaodi." Her voice was hoarse, as though it had been scraped over sandpaper. "That's a lowly name." I let out a soft laugh and casually tossed the handkerchief onto the ground in front of her. "Now that you've entered the Marquis' residence, you must follow its rules. From this day forth, you will be called a go. You'll do rough work such as chopping wood and tending the fire in the woodshed in the outer courtyard. If you dare act out in the slightest, the Marquis's canes are far harder than the fists of your gambling-addicted father. Ego stared intently at the silk handkerchief embroidered with delicate orchids on the ground. It was the cleanest, prettiest thing she had ever seen in her life. Yet I had thrown it to her as though it were nothing but trash. She clenched her fists tightly, her nails digging deep into her palms, and forced a single word through her clenched teeth: yes. And so, the true daughter of the Fu family, who had once held a lofty status in her previous life, became Ego, the lowest-ranking scullery maid in my Marquis's household. I did not deliberately torment her, because the snobbish older women in the outer court of the Marquis's residence would naturally teach her how to conduct herself. The work in the woodshed was the most grueling of all. Every day, before dawn, Ego had to get up to chop wood, tend the fire, and empty the night soil. If she did a poor job, she would be whipped and cursed by the old matrons. If she did well, her food was often snatched away by the burly maids. In a place like that, survival was the only rule. But I had underestimated the ambition and restlessness buried in Ego's bones. Even after being reduced to a maggot in the mire, she was constantly thinking about how to claw her way upward. Before long, autumn arrived, and the Marquis's residence held a grand chrysanthemum viewing banquet. The capital's powerful and influential figures gathered there, including the very fiancé who had carried on a secret affair with Fu Mingjin in her previous life, the heir to the Zhongyu Marquis's residence, Gu Yunting. Gu Yunting had an exceptionally handsome and dashing appearance. In his previous life, he had used that very face to beguile Fu Mingjin completely. With the banquet half over, Gu Yunting took advantage of the alcohol and went alone to a secluded corner of the garden to sober up. Standing in the attic, I watched coldly as a frail figure furtively evaded the patrolling guards and crept toward where Gu Yunting was. It was Ego. She had clearly found out Gu Yunting's identity and intended to imitate the seductive fox spirits in those storybooks, using some sort of accident to arouse the young heir's pity and thus escape the hell that was the woodshed. I curved my lips slightly, beckoned Xia Chan over, and whispered a few words to her. Behind the ornamental rockery in the garden, Gu Yunting was rubbing his temples. Ego had deliberately changed into a somewhat clean-looking blue maid's dress she had stolen from somewhere. She took a deep breath, pretended to trip and fall, let out a delicate cry, and threw herself straight at Gu Yunting. Ow! Had things gone according to the scene she had imagined, Gu Yunting should have instinctively caught her. Then the two would have gazed into each other's eyes, and passion would have flared between them. However, just as she was about to throw herself at Gu Yunting, a foot clad in black official boots suddenly shot out from the side and mercilessly kicked her square in the chest. Bang! The tremendous force sent Ego flying. She slammed heavily into the artificial rockery and spat out a mouthful of blood with a cry. What filthy thing dares throw itself at this heir? Gu Yunting said, disgustedly dusting off his sleeve as though he had touched some revolting piece of refuse. The guards beside him immediately drew their swords and surrounded Ego on the ground. Ego clutched her chest and coughed violently. Her face, already covered in frostbite, was now smeared with blood and dirt, making her look even more ferocious and terrifying. She stared at the sharp blades in horror and tried to explain, "And my lord, please spare me. I merely wasn't careful." Wasn't careful? A cool, clear voice like shattering jade came from behind the rockery. I slowly stepped out, followed by a group of maids and older female servants. The pale moon silk cloak embroidered in Suzhou style fluttered gently in the autumn wind, making me appear even more untouchable. First miss. Seeing me come out, Gu Yunting immediately put on a refined and elegant smile. I hope you won't take offense. The servants in this Marquis's residence seem to have grown somewhat lax about the rules. I ignored Gu Yunting's hypocritical expression, my icy gaze settling on Egu on the ground. Egu, I told you to chop firewood in the woodshed, yet you ran off to cause a scene in front of our honored guest. It seems the work in the woodshed is too easy, leaving you with enough leisure to play this little throwing yourself into someone's arms game here. I walked up to her and looked down at her condescendingly. When Ego saw me, extreme panic and fear flashed across her eyes. She knew that her plan had completely failed and that she had fallen into my hands. Miss. I didn't. I really was only passing by. She prostrated herself on the ground, desperately knocking her head against it until blood soon began to seep from her forehead. Passing by? You're merely a rough maid who tends the fires, yet you just happen to be passing through this garden, where so many distinguished guests have gathered? I let out a soft laugh, but its sound was as cold as ice piercing to the bone. Since you seem to enjoy pouncing on people so much, I suppose you must find those hands of yours too idle. I turned around. My voice was not loud, yet it carried clearly throughout the surroundings. Guards! Drag this insolent wretch away. Since she refuses to use those hands to chop wood properly, there's no point in keeping them. Sever the tendons in her hands and send her to the western courtyard to empty the night soil. If she dares to cause any more trouble, beat her to death and throw her to the mass graveyard to feed the dogs. Yes. Several burly matrons lunged at Ego like wolves and tigers, grabbing her by the hair and dragging her outside. No. Don't. Miss, spare me. Young master, save me. Ego's shrill screams echoed through the garden, but no one even spared her a glance. Gu Yunting covered his nose and mouth in disgust, as though afraid of being tainted by some ill omen. I coldly watched the trail of blood left on the ground as Ego was dragged away, an indescribable sense of pleasure rising in my heart. Fu Mingjin, this is your true fate. In our previous life, you enjoyed wealth and glory while trampling on my bones. In this life, I will make you like the mud rotting on the ground beneath everyone's feet, never to rise again for all eternity. The night soil room in the western courtyard was the darkest and foulest-smelling place in the entire Marquis's residence. After the tendons in Ego's hands were severed, she could no longer lift anything heavy. Like livestock, she could only crouch on the ground every day, struggling to push the heavy manure cart with her crippled wrists. Through the changing seasons, 3 years passed. Her already small frame became even more hunched, and her entire body gave off a stench that no amount of washing could remove. I thought that after being subjected to such torment, she would have accepted her fate long ago. But in the end, I had underestimated that ungrateful wretch from my previous life, the one who had endured in silence, plotted patiently, and ultimately poisoned me to death. Even in hell, she was still frantically searching for a chance to climb back out. It was an afternoon in late autumn. Several old maids from the residence were shirking their duties and gossiping in a corner outside the western courtyard wall. They brought up the old incident of Nanny Lu being driven out of the residence for stealing the imperial gift of jewelry, and casually mentioned an unsolved mystery from those days. Do you think that on the night Madame gave birth, when Nanny Lu sneaked out carrying a bamboo basket, she really switched the second young miss with someone else? Just look at the second young miss now, she's stupid and fat. How could she possibly have any of our Marquis and Madame's grace? Shoo! Have you got a death wish? How dare you say such things? Though, now that you mention it, it is rather strange. I heard that Nanny Lu's own granddaughter was later sold into our household to empty the night soil. Behind the corner, Agu, who was cleaning the manure buckets, stood as if struck by lightning. Although both her hands were crippled, she was not stupid. Recalling how old she had been when Lu Dazhuang sold her into the household, as well as the words Lu Dazhuang had drunkenly cursed at her once, "You good-for-nothing money loser. If your maternal grandmother hadn't said you could exchange for a lifetime of wealth and honor, I would have drowned you long ago," a shocking, outrageous truth gradually took shape in her mind. She, Agu, was the true legitimate second daughter of the Marquis of Jinyuan's household. And that fool throwing her weight around in the inner residence was actually Nanny Lu's low-born granddaughter. This realization, like a raging fire, instantly ignited the heart that had suppressed countless grievances and ambitions. 3 days later, in the main hall of the Marquis's residence. Father was taking the day off today and was drinking tea with Mother in the hall. I sat below them, lowering my head as I checked the estate's income from last month. The fake heiress, Fu Mingjin, was sitting nearby, gnawing on a roast chicken without a shred of decorum while loudly complaining that the color of her newly made autumn clothes was not bright enough. In this seemingly peaceful moment, a sudden commotion broke out outside the main hall. "Let me in. I'm the second young lady of the Marquis' estate. I'm the true heiress. You filthy servants, all of you, get out of my way." Accompanied by sharp, hoarse screams, a small, emaciated figure reeking of filth, with graying, disheveled hair like an evil spirit's, somehow summoned a burst of brute strength, broke free from the guard's restraint, and charged straight into the main hall. Outrageous! What madwoman dares barge into the main hall? Father slammed his teacup down and flew into a rage. Mother was even overcome by the stench and began coughing repeatedly. Covering her nose and mouth with a handkerchief, she shouted harshly, "Someone! Hurry up and drag this lunatic out and beat her to death." "Wait!" Ago suddenly raised his head, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the father and mother seated in the place of honor. Then he abruptly pointed at the fake heiress beside him, who was gnawing on a roast chicken, and shrieked bitterly, "Marquis! Madam! You've been deceived. That fat, stupid woman isn't your daughter at all. I am Fu Mingjin. Nanny Lu switched us at birth." As soon as these words were spoken, the entire main hall fell into deathly silence. The fake heiress was so frightened that the roast chicken fell from her hand, and she sat there dumbfounded. The father and mother's expressions changed drastically, a flash of shock and suspicion passing through their eyes. After all, the fake heiress's sheer stupidity had indeed given them countless headaches over the years, and Nanny Lu's actions back then had indeed seemed suspicious. I closed the ledger in my hands, a barely perceptible cold smile curling at the corners of my lips. At last, she has come. Utter nonsense. I rose and slowly walked to the center of the hall, my gaze scraping across Ago's contorted, agitated face like a blade. "You're nothing but a lowly servant who empties the night soil. Unable to endure the hardship of your work, you've actually dreamed up such a lunatic delusion, thinking you could worm your way into the Fu family? I'm not crazy." Seeing me step forward, the venom in Ago's eyes grew even more intense. She screamed hysterically, "Eldest miss, do you dare let Madam and me undergo a blood test to determine our relation? Once we do, the truth will be clear. I'm your real younger sister." Blood testing for kinship? I gently toyed with the exquisite mutton-fat jade bracelet on my wrist, smiling with both pity and cruelty. "Fine. Since you're a mad dog on the brink of death, still snapping at everyone, I'll grant your wish. It's also a perfect opportunity to silence the endless gossip and restore my sister's innocence." I turned to my mother. "Mother, please give us a drop of blood, so this vile servant can die convinced." My mother's face was livid, but to dispel all doubts about the home manor's lineage once and for all, she gritted her teeth and nodded. I gave Xia-chan a meaningful look, and she immediately withdrew, understanding my intention. Before long, she returned carrying a black lacquered tray. On it were 2 white jade bowls filled with clear water. These 2 bowls of water were prepared by Xia-chan at my instruction long before she charged into the main hall. I coated the inside of one bowl with an extremely thin layer of clear oil, while secretly dissolving a little alum into the other. Xia-chan carried the bowl coated with clear oil over to Ago. Ago impatiently picked up the silver needle beside him with his crippled hand and viciously pierced his fingertip. Crimson blood dripped into the white jade bowl, spreading through the water. Immediately afterward, Mother also furrowed her brow as the old woman pricked her finger and let a drop of blood fall into the bowl. Ago stared fixedly at the bowl of water, her eyes gleaming with fervent hope, as if she could already see herself dressed in silk and satin, basking in the glory of trampling me beneath her feet. However, in the very next moment, the fervor on her face instantly froze. The 2 drops of blood floated separately in the water, and no matter how much time passed, they remained as incompatible as fire and water, utterly unable to merge. No. No, that's impossible. How could this be? Ago stared at the bowl in disbelief, her eyes wide with panic. Like a madwoman, she stirred the water in an attempt to make the blood merge. I'm the real one. I'm the real one. Stop! I shouted, silencing her, then sneered repeatedly. Facts speak louder than words. You lowly servant, what else do you have to say? To make this charade even more convincing, I turned to the fake heiress and said, Mingjin, you drip one in as well. Let this madwoman see what true blood ties look like. Though the fake heiress was usually foolish, she knew that this was the key to saving her life. Trembling, she stepped forward and dripped her blood into the second bowl of water Xiachan had brought, with alum added. The mother's blood dripped in again. The moment the 2 drops of blood touched, they rapidly intertwined and merged, eventually becoming a pool of blood indistinguishable from one another. Do you see clearly now? I looked down coldly at Agu, who had collapsed limply on the ground. This is the true bloodline of the Marquis's residence. And you're nothing but a lowly servant who has lost her mind, deluding herself that a wild pheasant can become a phoenix. No. There's something wrong with the water. It was you. Fu Mingyan, it must have been you tampering with it. Agu completely broke down. She pointed at me in despair and let out a shrill wail. Presumptuous! Father had completely lost his patience, blazing with fury. Drag this mad servant who spouts nothing but nonsense away. Break both her legs first, then pull out her tongue. Let's see if she still dares to bite at people and cause trouble everywhere. Yes! The burly guard surged forward and dragged Ago out as if he were a dead dog. Piercing screams accompanied by the crisp sound of breaking bones rang out beyond the main hall. I looked at the pool of blood on the floor and leisurely wiped my hands with a handkerchief. Blood testing to verify kinship? Calling a deer a horse? Fu Mingjin, from the moment you forced that cup of poisoned wine down my throat in my previous life, you could only ever be a beast in my eyes, less than a dog. Your despair has only just begun. The shrill screams echoed over the Marquis's residence for a long time before gradually weakening, ultimately turning into spine-chilling whimpers. Ago's kneecaps had been brutally shattered by the family discipline, and the tongue that had cursed me countless times in my previous life and uttered the most vicious words in the world had also been torn out halfway. She was thrown into the cold, damp darkroom like a heap of sludge, covered in blood, barely breathing. Late at night, carrying a glass lantern, I sent everyone away and stepped alone into that dark room filled with the stench of blood and decay. Hearing footsteps, Ago, curled up in a pile of hay, flinched in pain. When she recognized me in the dim lantern light, the eyes clouded by agony once again erupted with terrifying spite and resentment. She opened her blood-stained mouth, a strange heh-heh rattling in her throat, like a dying beast struggling desperately as she tried to crawl toward me. Dressed in a luxurious brocade gown embroidered with large peonies and silk, I stood quietly 3 paces away, looking down at her from above. There was not the slightest trace of pity in my eyes, only the indifference one might show toward an ant. It hurts terribly, doesn't it? I parted my vermilion lips slightly, my voice exceptionally clear and ethereal in the silent darkness. You must be wondering how you, clearly the most honored legitimate second daughter of this Marquis's household, could have fallen into such a fate, worse than death. You must hate Nanny Lu with all your heart, and hate me even more for what I did to the water today. Upon hearing my words, Agu's pupils suddenly contracted. She stared at me in disbelief, a crazed hiss rising from her throat. She knew! She knew I had tampered with that bowl of water. I slowly crouched down and placed the colored glass lantern on the ground. Through the swaying light and shadows, I looked at her face, twisted beyond recognition by shock. You want to ask me, since I knew you were the real one, why did I treat you like this? I leaned slightly toward her and moved closer, speaking each word distinctly in a voice only the two of us could hear. Agu, do you really think I was asleep on the night of thunderstorms when you were born? Those words were like a thunderbolt from the ninth heaven, striking Agu squarely on the crown of her head. Her entire body suddenly went rigid, and even her breathing stopped. She stared at me with bulging eyes, as though her eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. When Nanny Lou put that fake into the cradle and wrapped you in a piece of coarse, ragged cloth before stuffing you into a bamboo basket, I was lying on the Luohan couch nearby, watching everything clearly. Seeing the endless fear and despair gradually spread across her eyes, I curled my lips into a cruel smile. I watched with my own eyes as she covered your mouth. I watched her take you away and walk out that door. I didn't make a sound or try to stop her. Because I straightened up and smoothed the skirt of my completely unwrinkled dress. I thought that compared with the fine clothes and rich food of the Marquis' residence, the foul water and filthy mud of the slums were more suited to the low-born nature in your bones. Ego completely broke down. It turned out that all the suffering and inhuman torture she had endured throughout her life were not cruel twists of fate at all. When she was still a baby, she had been pushed into the abyss by the very woman before her, her elder sister in name, who had done it with her own hands. All her ambitions and struggles were, in my eyes, nothing more than a ridiculous farce performed by a pathetic clown. Ugh! Sob. Ego rolled desperately on the ground, clutching the dirt with her mutilated hands. Tears mixed with blood and smeared her entire face. The agony of having her soul utterly crushed from within was even more unbearable than the torment inflicted on her body. As I watched her wretched state, the resentment from that lifetime, buried deep within my heart, finally dissipated without a trace. Someone come. I turned coldly toward the door and called out. Xia-chan entered with two burly matrons. Keeping this wretched maid in the manor would only bring bad luck. I covered my mouth and nose with a handkerchief, my tone as calm as though I were disposing of a piece of useless garbage. 3 li south of the city, in Willow Alley, there's a brothel that specializes in taking in ruined women. I hear that as long as they're still breathing, whether crippled or mute, even the lowest laborers can pay a few coppers to have their way with them for a night. Sell her there. Even if she fetches only a single coin, it can count as her repayment for the Marquis' manor feeding her all these years. When Ego heard the words brothel, she began convulsing violently in terror. She desperately knocked her head against the floor before me, but even with her forehead already battered and bloody, she could not earn so much as a glance from me. The 2 old maids dragged her out without the slightest mercy, like a dead dog. The long trail of blood was soon washed away completely by the servants, as if a go had never existed in this Marquis' residence. Half a month later, while Xia-chan was combing my hair, she lowered her voice and reported Ago's fate to me. First, miss, the madam of that brothel sent word that the vile maid was tortured to death by several drunken dockworkers the night before last. Her body was wrapped in a torn straw mat and thrown into the mass graveyard outside the city. She didn't even have a grave mound. I heard that very night, wild dogs gnawed her until only a skeleton remained. I gazed at my bright and noble reflection in the bronze mirror, my expression indifferent, and casually chose a red gold hairpin adorned with kingfisher feathers to place in my coiffure. Understood. In the end, she still couldn't escape the fate of having poison tear through her entrails and being beaten to death with clubs. The only difference was that this time, she had walked into the hell I had laid out for her with her own 2 hands. As for that impostor heiress, Fu Mingjin. After the farce of the blood test to determine kinship, although father was convinced that she was his biological daughter, he had grown thoroughly disgusted with her vulgar and foolish behavior. He hastily married her off as the second wife to a widowed 6th-rank minor official in a remote prefecture. I heard that the official was notoriously harsh and maintained extremely strict household rules. After the impostor heiress married into the family, she was tormented mercilessly by those rules every day and died of melancholy before 2 years had passed. As for me, Fu Mingyan, in the year I came of age, I was chosen by the Empress Dowager for my impeccable conduct as a noble young lady and my astonishing talent for managing the Marquisate properties, and was personally appointed Crown Princess. On the day of my grand wedding, 10 miles of red bridal finery stretched out, covering the entire capital in a dazzling scarlet. Wearing a phoenix crown and a red bridal robe, I stood atop the lofty white jade steps, looking down upon this flourishing mortal world. The wind swept across the hem of my dress, embroidered with golden phoenixes. I slightly raised my head, welcoming the glorious new life that was mine. The bitterness of that poisoned wine in my previous life and the betrayal of those who repaid my kindness with ingratitude have long since been completely washed away by the supreme honor I enjoy in this life. Stepping over the bones of my enemies, I climbed, step by step, to the pinnacle of power. This vast realm stretches for thousands of miles, flourishing in its prime, and my glory has only just begun. The end.